Yo, what up, what up, what up, and welcome back to Pnoid News. Man, listen, all right, I wanna do a service to Niccolo Machiavelli's The Art of War. So I got my boy Sophocles here with me and Neuro. And so we're gonna stand here and read this, and I'm gonna have Neuro do the preface, and then me and Sophocles are gonna stand here and do Fabrizio and Cosimo's parts. And I think it's gonna work out really well. So Neuro, you ready to rock?
Yeah.
All right, let's get to it, buddy.
All right. So, as I believe that it is possible for one to praise without concern any man after he is dead, since every reason and supervision for adulation is lacking, I am not apprehensive in praising our own Cosimo Chile, whose name is never remembered by me without tears, as I have recognized in him those parts which can be desired in a good friend among friends and in a citizen of his country. For I do not know what pertained to him more than to spend himself willingly, not accepting that courage of his for his friends. And I do not know of any enterprise that dismayed him when he knew it was for the good of his country. And I confess freely not to have met among so many men whom I have known and worked with a man in whom there was a mind more fired with great and magnificent things. Nor does one grieve with the friends of another of his death, except for his having been born to die young, unhonored, within his own home, without having been able to benefit anyone with that mind of his. For one would know that no one could speak of him except to say that a good friend had died. It does not remain for us, however, for anyone else who, like us, knew him, to be able, because of this, to keep the faith, since deeds do not seem to his laudable qualities. It is true, however, that fortune was not so unfriendly to him that it did not leave some brief memory of the dexterity of his genius, and was demonstrated by some of his writings in compositions of amorous verses, in which, as he was not in love, he employed as an exercise in order not to use his time uselessly in his juvenile years, in order that fortune might lead him to higher thoughts. Here it can be clearly comprehended that if his objective was exercise, how very happily he described his ideas and how much he was honored in his poetry. Fortune, however, having deprived us of the use of so great a friend, it appears to me it is not possible to find any other better remedy than for us to seek to benefit from his memory, and to recover from it any matter that was either keenly observed or wisely discussed. And as there is nothing of his more recent than the discussions which the Lord Fabrizio Colonna had with him in his gardens, where matters pertaining to war were discussed at length by that lord, with questions keenly and prudently asked by Cosimo. It seemed proper to me, having been present with other friends of ours, to recall him to memory. So that reading it, the friends of Cosimo who met there will renew in their minds the memory of his virtue, and another part grieving for not having been there will learn in part of many things discussed wisely by a most sagest man, useful not only to the military way of life, but to the civilian as well. I will relate, therefore, how Fabrizio Colonna, when he returned from Lombardy, where he had fought a long time gloriously for the Catholic king, decided to pass through Florence to rest several days in that city in order to visit His Excellency the Duke, and see again several gentlemen with whom he had been familiar in the past. Whence it appeared proper to Cosimo to invite him to a banquet in his gardens, not so much to show his generosity as to have reason to talk to him at length, and to learn and understand several things from him, according Fabrizio, therefore, came as planned and was received by Cosimo together with several other loyal friends of his, among whom were Zanobi, Buondelmonte, Battista della Palla, and Luigi Alamanni, young men most ardent in the same studies and loved by him, whose qualities, because they were also praised daily by himself, we will omit. Fabrizio, therefore, was honored according to the times and the place, with all the highest honors they could give him. As soon as the convivial pleasures were past and the table cleared and every arrangement of feasting finished, which, in the presence of great men and to those who have their minds turned to honorable thoughts, is soon accomplished, and because the day was long and the heat intense, Cosimo, in order to satisfy their desire better, judged it would be well to take the opportunity to escape the heat by leading them to the more secret and shadowy part of his garden. When they arrived there, the chairs brought out, some sat on the grass which was most fresh in the place, some sat on chairs placed in those parts under the shadow of very high trees. Fabrizio praised the place as most delightful, and looking especially at the trees, he did not recognize one of them, and looked puzzled. Cosimo, becoming aware of this, said, "Perhaps you have no knowledge of some of these trees, but do not wonder about them, because here are some which were more widely known by the ancients than are those commonly seen today." And giving him the name of some and telling him that Bernardo, his grandfather, had worked hard in their culture, Fabrizio replied, "I was thinking that it was what you said I was, and this place and this study make me remember several princes of the kingdom who delighted in their ancient culture and the shadow they cast." And stopping speaking of this, and somewhat upon himself as though in suspense, he added, "If I did not think I would offend you, I would give you my opinion, but I do not believe in talking and discussing things with friends in this manner, that I insult them. How much better would they have done, it is said with peace to everyone, to seek to imitate the ancients in the strong and rugged things, not in the soft and delicate, and in the things they did under the sun, not in the shadows. To adopt the honest and perfect ways of antiquity, not the false and corrupt. For while these practices were pleasing to my Romans, my country without them was ruined." To which Cosimo replied, but to avoid the necessity of having to repeat so many times who is speaking and what the other adds, only the names of those speaking will be noted without repeating the others. Cosimo therefore said, "You have opened the way for a discussion which I desired, and I pray you to speak without regard, for I will question you without regard. And if in questioning or replying I accuse or excuse anyone, it will not be for accusing or excusing, but to understand the truth from you." And that's all I have here.
Tom?
Oh, no wonder, no wonder, no wonder. I was muted out. Sorry. And I will
Okay.
be, I will be much content to tell you of all you know about, of all that you ask me, whether it be true or not. I will leave to your judgment, and I will be grateful if you ask me, for I am about to learn as much from what you ask me as you will from replying to you. Because many times a wise questioner causes one to consider many things and understand many others, which without having been asked would never have been understood.
I want to return to what you were first saying, that my grandfather and those of yours had more wisely imitated the ancients and rugged things than the delicate ones. And I want to excuse my side because I will let you excuse your side. I do not believe that in your time there was a man who disliked living as softly as he, and that he was so much a lover of that rugged life which you praise. Nonetheless, he recognized he could not practice it in his personal life, nor in that of his sons. having been born in so corrupted an age where anyone who wanted to depart from the common usage would be deformed and despised by everyone. For if anyone in a naked state should thrash upon the sand under the high sun, or upon the snow in the most icy months of winter, as did Diogenes, he would be considered mad. If anyone like the Spartan should raise his children on a farm, make them sleep in the open, go with head and feet bare, bathe in cold water in order to harden them to endure vicissitudes, so that then they might love life less and fear death less, he would be praised by few and followed by none, so that dismayed at these ways of living, he presently leaves the ways of the ancients, and in imitating antiquity, does only that which he can with little wonderment.
You have excused him strongly in this part, and certain you speak the truth, but I do not speak so much of these rugged ways of living as I do more human ways in which have a greater conformity to the ways of living today, which I do not believe should have been difficult to introduce by one who is numbered among the princes of a city. I will never forego my example of my Romans. If their ways of living should be examined and their institutions in their republic, there will be observed in many things not possible to introduce in a society where they might yet do something of good.
What are those things similar to the ancients that you would introduce?
To honor and reward virtue, not to have contempt for poverty, to esteem the modes and orders of military discipline, to constrain citizens to love one another, to live without factions, to esteem less the private and the public, and other such things which would be easily added in these times. It is not difficult to persuade people to these ways. When one considers these at length and approaches them in the usual manner, for the truth will appear in such examinations, that every common talent is capable of undertaking them. Anyone can arrange these things. For example, one plants trees under the shadow in which he lives more happily and merrily than if he had not planted them.
I do not want to reply to anything of what you have spoken, but I do want to give judgment on these, which can be easily judged, and I shall address myself to you, who accuse those in serious and important actions are not imitators of the ancients, thinking that in this way I can more easily carry out my intentions. I should want, therefore, to know from you whence it arises that, on the one hand, you condemn those who do not imitate the ancients in their actions, on the other hand, in matters of war, which is your profession, and in which you are judged to be excellent, it is not. Observe that you have employed any of the ancient methods, or those which have some similarity.
You have come to the point where I expected you to, for what I said did not merit any other question, nor did I wish for any other. And although I am able to save myself with a simple excuse, nonetheless I want for your greater satisfaction than mine, since the season and weather allows it, to enter into a much longer discussion. Men who want to do something ought to first prepare themselves with all industry, in order when the opportunity is seen, to be prepared to achieve which they have proposed, and whenever the preparations are undertaken cautiously, unknown to anyone, so none can be accused of negligence unless he is first discovered by the occasion, in which if it is not then successful, it is then seen either he has not sufficiently prepared himself, or that he has not in some part given thought to it. And as the opportunity has not come to me to be able to show the preparations I would make to bring the military to your ancient organization, I have not done so, I cannot be blamed either by you or by others. I believe this excuse is enough to respond to your accusation.
It would be enough if I was certain that the opportunity did not present itself.
But because I know you could doubt, whether the opportunity had come about or not, I want to discuss at length, if you will listen to me with patience, which preparations are necessary to be made first. What occasion needs to arise? What difficulty impedes these preparations from becoming beneficial, and the occasion from arriving? And that this is, which appears to be a paradox, most difficult and most easy to do.
You cannot do anything more pleasing for me and for the others than this. But it is not painful for you to speak. It will never be painful for us to listen. But if this discussion may be long, I want to help from these my friends, and with your permission, and I pray you one thing, that you do not become annoyed if we sometimes interrupt you with some opportune question.
I am most content that you, Cosimo, with these other young people here, should question me, for I believe that young men will become more familiar with military matters and more easily understand what I have to say. The others, whose head is white and whose blood is icy, in part are enemies of war and in part incorrigible, as those who believe that the times are not the evil way and not the evil ways constrain men to live in such a fashion. So ask anything of me with assurance and without regard. I desire this as much as because it will afford me a little rest, and because it will give me pleasure not to leave any doubts in your minds. I want to begin from your words from where you said to me that in war, which is my profession, I have not employed any of the ancient methods. Upon this I say that being a profession by which men of every time were not able to live honestly, it cannot be employed by a profession except by a republic or a kingdom, and both of these, if well established, will never allow any of their citizens or subjects to employ it as a profession. For he who practices it will never be judged to be good. As to gain some usefulness from it at any time, he must be rapacious, deceitful, violent, and have many qualities which of necessity do not make him good, nor can men who employ this as a profession, the great as well as the least, be made otherwise, for this profession does not provide for them in peace, whence they are obliged either to hope that there will be no peace, or to gain so much for themselves in times of war that they can provide for themselves in times of peace. And wherever one of these two thoughts exists, it does not occur in a good man, for from the desire to provide for oneself in every circumstance, robberies, violence, and assassinations result, which such soldiers do to friends as well as enemies. And from not desiring peace, there arises those deceptions captains perpetrate upon those whom they lead, because war hardens them. And even if peace occurs frequently, it happens in the leaders being deprived of their stipends, and their licentious mode of living raise a flag of piracy without any mercy sack a province. Do you not have within the memory of the events of your time many soldiers in Italy finding themselves without employment because of the termination of wars, gathered themselves into very troublesome gangs, calling themselves companies, and went about levying tribute on the towns and sacking the country, without there being any remedy able to be applied? Have you not read how the Carthaginian soldiers, when the first war they engaged in the Romans under the Matus and Spendius was ended, tumultuously chose two leaders and waged a more dangerous war against the Carthaginians than that which they had just concluded with the Romans? And in the time of our father, Francesco Sforza, in order to be able to live honorably, comfortably in times of peace, not only deceived the Milanese, in whose pay he was, but took away their liberty and became their prince. All the other soldiers of Italy who employed the military as their particular profession have been like this man. And if through their malignity they have not become dukes of Milan, so much more do they merit to be censured. For without such a return, if their lives were to be examined, they all had the same cares. Forza, father of Francesco, constrained Anna to throw herself into the arms of the King of Aragon, having abandoned her suddenly and left her disarmed amid her enemies, only in order to satisfy this ambition of either levying tribute or taking the kingdom. Braccio, with the same industry, sought to occupy the kingdom of Naples, and would have succeeded had he not been routed and killed at Aquila. Such evils do not result from anything else other than the existence of men who employ the practice of soldiering as their own profession. Do you not have a proverb from which strengthens my argument, which says, war makes robbers and peace hangs them? For those who don't know how to live by another practice, and not finding anyone who will support them in that, and not having so much virtue that they know how to come to live together honorably, are forced by necessity to roam the streets, and justice is forced to extinguish them.
It made me turn this profession art of soldiering back almost to nothing, and I had supposed it to be the most excellent and most honorable of any. So that if you do not clarify this better, I will not be satisfied. For if it is as you say, I do not know whence arises the glory of Caesar, Pompey, Scipio, Marcellus, and of so many Roman captains who are celebrated for their fame as the gods.
I have not yet finished discussing all that I propose, which included two things. The one, that a good man was not able to undertake this practice because of his profession. The other, that a well-established republic or kingdom would never permit its subjects or citizens to employ it for their profession. Concerning the first, I have spoken as much as has occurred to me. It remains for me to talk about the second, where I reply to this question of yours, and I say that Pompey and Caesar and almost all those captains who were in Rome after the last Carthaginian war acquired fame as valiant men, not as good men, but those who had lived before them acquired glory as valiant and good men, which results from the fact that these latter did not take up the practice of war as their profession. And those whom I named first, as those who employed it as a profession, and while the republic survived immaculately, no great citizen ever presumed by means of such a practice to enrich himself during periods of peace by breaking laws, despoiling the provinces, usurping and tyrannizing the country, and imposing himself in every way. Nor did anyone in the lowest fortune think of violating the sacred agreement, adhere himself to any private individual not fearing the Senate, or to perform any disgraceful act of tyranny in order to live at all times profession of war. But those who were captains, being content with the triumph, returned with the desire for private life. And those who were members of the army returned with a desire to lay down the arms they had taken up, and everyone returned to the art, trade, or profession by which they ordinarily lived. Nor was there ever anyone who hoped to provide for himself by plunder and by means of these arts. A clear and evident example of this, as it applies to the great citizens, can be found in the regent Attilio, who, when he was a captain of the Roman armies in Africa and having almost defeated the Carthaginians, asked the Senate for permission to return to his house to look after his farms, which were being spoiled by his laborers. Whence it is clearer than the sun that if the man had practiced war as a profession, and by means of it thought to obtain some advantage for himself, having so many provinces which he could plunder, he would not have asked permission to return to care for his fields, as each day he could have attained more than the value of all of his possessions. But as these good men who do not practice war as a profession do not expect to gain anything from it except hard work, danger, and glory, as soon as they are sufficiently glorious, desire to return to their homes and live from the practice of their own profession. As the men of lower status and gregarious soldiers, it is also true that everyone voluntarily withdrew from such a practice, for when he was not fighting, would have desired to fight, but when he was fighting, wanted to be dismissed, which illustrates the many ways, and especially in seeing that it was among the first privileges that the Roman people gave to one of its citizens, that he should not be constrained unwillingly to fight. Rome, therefore, while she was well organized, which it was up to the time of the Gracchi, did not have one soldier who had to take up this practice as a profession, and therefore had few bad ones, and these were severely punished. A well-ordered city, therefore, ought to desire that its training for war ought to be employed in times of peace as an exercise, and in times of war as a necessity and for glory, and to allow the public only to use it as a profession as Rome did. And any citizen who has other aims in using such exercises is not good, and that any city which governs itself otherwise is not well ordered.
I'm very much content and satisfied with what you have said up to now, and this conclusion which you have made pleases me greatly, and I believe it will be true when expected from a republic. But as to kings, I do not yet know why I should believe that a king would not want particularly to have him around those who take up such a practice as their profession.
A well-ordered kingdom ought so much to more avoid such artifices. These are only things which corrupt the king and all the ministers in a tyranny. And do not, on the other side, tell me of some present kingdom, for I will not admit them to be all well-ordered kingdoms. For kingdoms that are well-ordered do not give absolute power or rule to the kings except in the armies, for only there is a quick decision necessary, and therefore he who rules he who rules there must have the unique power. In other matters, he cannot do anything without counsel, and those who counsel him have to fear those whom he may have near him, who in times of peace desire war, because they are unable to live without it. But I want to dwell a little longer on this subject and look for a kingdom totally good, but similar to those that exist today, where those who took up the profession of war for themselves still ought to be feared by the king. For the sinews of armies, without any doubt, are the infantry, so that if the king does not organize himself in such a way that his infantry in times of peace are content to return to their homes and live from the practice of their own professions, it must happen of necessity that he will be ruined. For there is not found a more dangerous infantry than that which is comprised of those who make up the waging of war as their professions. For you are forced to make war always, or pay them always, or to risk the danger that they take away the kingdom from you. To make war always is not possible, and one cannot pay always, and hence the danger is run of losing the state. My Romans, as I have said, as long as they were wise and good, and never permitted that their citizens should take up this practice as their profession, notwithstanding that they were able to raise them up at all times, for they made war at all times. But in order to avoid the harm which this continuous practice of theirs could do to them, since the times had not changed, they changed the men and kept turning men over in their legion so that every 15 years they always completely remanned them. And thus they desired men in the flower of their age, which is from 18 to 35 years, during which time their legs, their hands, their eyes worked together, nor did they expect that their strength should decrease in them, or that the malice should grow in them, and as they did in corrupt times. First, and then Tiberius, thinking more of their own power than the public usefulness, in order to rule over the Roman people more easily, begun to disarm them and to keep the armies continually in the frontiers of the empire. And because they did not think it sufficient to hold the Roman people and the Senate in check, they instituted an army called the Praetorian Guard, which was kept near the walls of Rome in a fort adjacent to the city. And as now they begun freely to permit men assigned to the army to practice military matters as their profession, there soon resulted that these men became insolent, and they became formidable to the Senate and damaging to the emperor, whence there resulted many men were killed because of the insolence, for they gave the empire and took it away from anyone they wished. And it often occurred that at one time there were many emperors created by the several armies, from which a state of affairs proceeded first a division of the empire and finally its ruin. Kings ought to therefore, if they want to live securely, have their infantry composed of men who, when it is necessary for them to wage war, will willingly go forth to it for the love of him, and afterwards, when peace comes, more willingly return to their homes, which will always happen if he selects men who know how to live by a profession other than this. And thus he ought to desire, with the coming of peace, that his princes return to governing their people, gentlemen of to the cultivation of their possessions, and infantry to their particular arts, trades, and professions. And every one of these will willingly make war in order to have peace, and will not seek to disturb peace to have war.
Truly, this reasoning of yours appears to me well considered. Nonetheless, as it is almost contrary to what I have thought up to now, my mind is not yet purged of every doubt, for I see many lords and gentlemen who provide for themselves in times of peace through the training for war, as do your equals who obtain provisions from princes in the community. I also see almost all the men at arms remaining in the garrisons of the city and of the fortresses, so that it appears to me that there is a long time of peace for everyone.
I do not believe that you believe this, that everyone has a place in the time of peace, for other reasons can be cited for their being stationed there. And the small number of people who remain in the places mentioned will answer your question. What is the proportion of infantry needed to be employed in time of war to that of the peace? For while the fortresses in the city are garrisoned in times of peace, they are much more garrisoned in times of war. To this should be added that the soldiers kept in the field, who are a great number, but all of whom are released in the time of peace. And concerning the garrisons of the states, who are a small number, Pope Julius and you have shown how much they are to be feared, who do not know any other profession than war. As you have taken them out of their garrisons because of their insolence and placed the Swiss there, who are born and raised under the laws and are chosen by the community in an honest election. So do not say farther that in the peace there is a place for every man. As the men at the arms continue in their enlistment in peacetime, the answer appears more difficult. Nonetheless, whoever considers everything well will easily find the answer for this thing of keeping on the men at arms in is a corrupt thing and not good. The reason is this: as there are men who do not have any art, trade, or profession, 1,000 evils will arise every day in those states where they exist, and especially so if they were joined by the great number of companions. But as they are few and unable by themselves to constitute an army, they therefore cannot do any serious damage. Nonetheless, they have done so many times, as I said of Francisco and Forza, his father, and Braccio of Perugia. So I do not approve of the custom of keeping men at arms, both because it is corrupt and because it can cause great evils.
Would you do without them, or if you keep them, how would you do so?
By means of an ordinance, not like those of the King of France, because they are as dangerous and insolent as ours, but like those of the ancients, who created horsemen, cavalry from the subjects in times of peace, sent them back to their homes to live in the practice of their own profession, as I shall discuss at length before I finish this discussion. So if part of the army can now live by such a practice, even when there is peace, it stems from a corrupt order. As to the provisions that are reserved for me and the other leaders, I say to you that this likewise is a most corrupt order, for a wise republic ought not to give them to anyone. Rather, it ought to employ its citizens as leaders in war, and in time of peace desire that they return to their professions. Thus also, a wise king ought not to give provisions to them, or if he does give them the reasons ought to be either as a reward for some excellent act in order to avail himself of such a man in peace as well as in war. And because you have mentioned me, I want the example to include me, and I say I have never practiced war as my profession, for my profession is to govern my subjects and defend them. In order to defend them, I must love peace, but know how to make war. And my king does not reward and esteem me so much for what I know of war, as because I also know how to counsel him in peace. Any king ought not, therefore, to want to have anyone next to him, anyone who is not thusly constituted, if he is wise and wants to govern prudently. For if he has around him either too many lovers of peace or too many lovers of war, they will cause him to err. I cannot, I cannot in this first discussion, according to my suggestions, say otherwise. And if this is not enough for you, you must seek one that satisfies you better. You can begin to recognize how much difficulty there is in bringing the ancient methods into modern wars, and what preparations a wise man must make, and what the opportunities he can hope for to put them into execution. But little by little, you will know these things better, and if the discussion on bringing any part of the ancient institutions to the present order of things does not worry you.
If we first desired to hear your discussion of these matters, clearly what you have set up to now redoubles that desire. We thank you, therefore, for what we have had, and ask you for the rest.
Since this is your pleasure, I want to begin to treat this matter from the beginning, being able to be in that way to demonstrate it more fully, so that it may be better understood. The aim of those who want to make war is to be able to combat in the field with every kind of enemy, and to be able to win the engagement. To want to do this, they must raise an army, and in raising an army, it is necessary to find men, arm them, organize them, train them in small and large battle orders, lodge them, and expose them to the enemy afterwards, either at a standstill or while marching. All the industry of war in the field is placed in these things, which are the more necessary and honored in the waging of war. And if one does well in offering battle to the enemy, all the other errors he may make in the conduct of war are supportable. But if he lacks this organization, even though he may be valiant in other particulars, he will never carry a war to victory and honor. For as one engagement that you win cancels out every other bad action of yours, when you lose one, all the things you have done well before become useless. Since it is necessary, therefore, first to find men, you must come to the lotto, draft of them. Hang on. All right. So, draft of them, as thus the ancients called it, in which we call skelta, selection. But in order to call it by a more honored name, I want to preserve the name Delato. Those who have drawn up regulations for war want men to be chosen from temperate countries, as they have spirit and are prudent. For warm countries give rise to men who are prudent but not spirited, and cold countries give rise to men who are spirited but not prudent. This regulation is drawn up well for one who is the prince of all the world, and therefore permitted to draw men from those places that appear best to him. But wanting to draw up regulation that anyone can use, one must say that every republic and every kingdom ought to take soldiers from their own country, whether it's hot, cold, or temperate. For from ancient examples, it is seen that every country good soldiers are made by training, because their nature is lacking. Industry supplies it, which in this case is worth more than nature. And selecting them for another place cannot be called a because Delato means to take from the best of a province, and to have the power to select well those who do not want to fight, and those who do want to. This Delato therefore cannot be made unless the places are subject to you, for you cannot take whoever you want in the countries that are not yours, but you need to take those who want to come. There we go.
And of those who want to come, it can even be said that they turn and leave you, and because of this, it can then be called a Delato.
In a certain way, you say what you say is true. Yeah, in a certain way, you say what is true. But consider the defects such as Delato has in itself, for often it happens that it is not a Delato. The first thing to consider is that those who are your subjects and do not willingly want to fight are not of the best, rather they are the worst of a province. For if they are troublesome, idle, without restraint, without religion, subject to the rule of the father, blasphemous gamblers, and in every way badly brought up, they are they are those who want to fight, and these habits cannot be more contrary to a true and good military life. When there are so many such men offered to you that they exceed the number you had designated, you can select them. But if material is bad, it is impossible for the lotto to be good. But many times it happens that there are not so many as they are needed to fill the number you require. So that being forced to take them all, it results that it can no longer be called the making of a lotto, but enlisting of an infantry. The armies of Italy and other places are raised today evils except in Germany, where there is no one enlisted by command of the prince, but according to the wishes of those who want to fight. Think therefore what methods of those ancients can now be introduced in an army of men put together by similar means.
What means should be taken, therefore?
What I have just said, select them from your own subjects and with authority of the prince.
Would you introduce any ancient form in those thus selected?
You know well it would be so. If it is a principality, he who should command should be their prince, or an ordinary lord. Or if it is a republic, a citizen for the time should be captain. Otherwise, it is difficult to do the thing well.
Why?
I will tell you in the time for now, I want this to suffice for you, and it cannot be done well in any other way.
If you have, therefore, to make a bestilato in your country, whence do you judge it better to draw them? From the city or the countryside?
Those who have written of this all agree that it is better to select from the countryside, as they are men accustomed to discomfort, brought up on hard work, accustomed to be in the sun, avoid the shade, know how to handle a sword, dig a ditch, carry a load, and are without cunning or malice. But on this subject, my opinion would be that the soldiers are of two kinds, afoot and a horseback, and those who are afoot selected from the countryside, and those who are on horseback from the city.
Of what age would you draw them?
If I had to raise an entirely new army, I would draw them from 17 to 40 years of age. If the army already exists and I had to replenish it, at 17 years of age always.
I do not understand this distinction well.
I will tell you, if I should have to organize an army where there is none, it would be necessary to select all those men who were more capable as long as they were military age. In order to instruct them, I would tell them, but if I should have to make the gelato in places where the army was already organized in order to supplement it, I would take those of 17 years of age because the others, having been taken for some time, would have been selected and instructed.
Therefore, you would want to make an ordinance similar to that which exists in our countries.
You say well. It is true that I would arm them, captain them, train them, and organize them in a way which I do not know whether or not you have organized them similarly.
Therefore, you praise the ordinance?
Why would you want me to condemn it?
Because many wise men have censored it.
You say something contrary when you say a wise man censored the ordinance, for he can be held a wise man and to have censored them wrongly.
The wrong conclusion that he has made will always cause us to have such an opinion.
Watch out that defect is not yours, but his. Is that which you have recognized before that this discussion furnishes proof.
You do a most gracious thing, but I would want to tell you that you should be able to justify yourself better, and that of which those men are accused. These men say thusly, either that it is useless, and our trusting in it will cause us to lose the state, or it is of virtue, and he who governs through it can easily deprive her of it. They cite the Romans, who by their own arms lost their liberty. They cite the Venetians and the King of France, of whom they say that the former, in order to obey one of its citizens, employed the arms of others, and the king disarmed his people so as to be able to command them more easily. But they fear the uselessness of this much more, for which uselessness they cite two principal reasons. The one, because they are inexpert. The other, for having to fight by force, because they say that they never learn anything from a great men, and nothing good is ever done by force.
All the reasons that you mention are for men who are not far-sighted, as I shall clearly show. And first, as to the uselessness, I say to you, no army is more use than your own, nor can any army of your own be organized except in this way. And as there is no debating over this, which all examples of ancient history does for them, I do not want to lose time over it. And because they cite inexperience and force, I say, as it is true, that inept experience gives rise to little spirit, enthusiasm, and force makes for discontent. But experience and enthusiasm gains for themselves the means of arming, training, and organizing them, as you will see in the first part of this discussion. But as the force, you must understand that men are brought to the army by commandment of the prince. They have to come, whether it is entirely by force or entirely voluntary. For if it were entirely from desire, there would not be a delato, as only a few of them would go. So also, the going entirely by force would produce bad results. Therefore, a middle way ought to be taken, where neither the entirely forced or entirely voluntary means are used. But they should come, drawn by the regard they have for the prince, where they are more afraid of his anger than of the immediate punishment. And it always happens that there will be a compulsion mixed with the willingness, from which the discontent cannot arise, which causes bad effects. Yet I do not claim that an army thus constituted cannot be defeated. For many times the Romans' armies were overcome, and the army of Hannibal was defeated, so that it can be seen that no army can be so organized that a promise can be given that it cannot be routed. These wise men of yours, therefore, ought not to measure the usefulness from having one time, but to believe that just as they can lose, so too can they win and remedy the cause of the defeat. And if they should look to this, they will find that they would not have happened because of the defect in the means, but of the organization, which was not sufficiently perfect. And as I have said, they ought to provide for you by not by censoring the organization, but by correcting it. And as to how it ought to be done, and you will come to know little by little. As being apprehensive that such an organization will not deprive you of the state by one who makes himself a leader, I reply that the arms carried by the citizens or subject given to them by laws and ordinances never do him harm, but rather are always of some usefulness and preserve the city, unincorporated for a longer time by means of these arms than without them. Rome remained free 400 years while armed. Sparta 800. Many other cities have been disarmed and have been free less than 40 years. For cities have need of arms, and if they do not have arms of them home, they hire them from foreigners. And the arms of foreigners more readily do harm to the public good than of their own. For they are easier to corrupt, and a citizen who becomes powerful can more readily avail himself, and can manage the people more readily, as he has to oppress men who are disarmed. I just wanted to put this out here. 1520 Machiavelli is standing here, like promoting the Second Amendment that we have in the United States. I just wanted to put that there. All right.
Yeah, like it.
Like, yo, legit, there's a reason why, like, I wanted to read this, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, I apologize. Like, you got to mention this right here, right? Like, have you noticed that everything he talks about is shit we do today? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of creepy, like reading it. It's like, oh, that's why the army does that.
Yo, do you know why? Yo, because every one of our founding fathers read this.
Yeah.
And we have no idea about it because Machiavelli is so hated by fucking Protestants and these fucking white Saxon fucks. Legit. You know what I mean? That, like, yo, they try to suppress this shit that literally, you know what I mean? Like, it was used to, like, form our shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just wanted to put that in there real quick. I apologize, man. It's important, though. I think it's important, right? You think it's important?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yo.
I think, like, there's a big thing, like, just normal people or whatever, they're kind of repulsed by, like, this idea of, like, the world of power and influence. And then, like, when it gets to the military or war, they get extra grossed out. So it's like, I don't know. It's good to read this stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. I mean, like, because this isn't about war and influence and power, right? I mean, this is about, like, logistics, right? Like, like The Art of War from, like, Sun Tzu, you know what I mean? Which is not a great book, but it's written by, like, a general about battle tactics, and it gets into that later on in this book. We're only doing chapter 1 right now, right? But this here is a book that literally is about the logistics of war. You know what I'm saying? Like, understanding, like, the social ideologies and ramifications and, you know what I mean, like, the basic principles of how you point of, like, actually conducting, like, the basic shit from, like, a king or a prince's standpoint or a government standpoint, right? Which is huge. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, right? You know, I just wanted to put that out there. Right, just because, like, this is an important paragraph. I just wanted to, you know what I mean, hit that right there with this one. You know what I mean? Anyway, like, yo, I'm hoping you're enjoying this. You enjoying this?
Yeah, I love it. This is sick.
All right, cool, man. Thank you. All right. So, in addition to this, a city ought to fear two enemies more than one, which avails itself of foreigners immediately has to fear not only its citizens, but the foreigners that have enlisted. And remember what I told you a short while ago. If Francesco Forza, you will see that that fear ought to exist. One which employs its own arms has not other fear except its own citizens. But all the reasons which can be given, I want this one to serve me, that no one ever established in a republic or a kingdom who did not think that it should be defended by those who lived there with arms. And if the Venetians had been as wise in this as other institutions, they would have created. Man, listen, I've lost myself again. I hate when I do that. Right. But all those reasons which can be given, I want this one to serve me. No one ever established a republic or a kingdom who did not think it should be defended by those who lived there. Created a new world kingdom, but whoso more merit censure, because they had been the first who were armed by their founders, and not having dominion on land, they armed themselves on the sea, where they waged war with virtue and with arms in hand in larger country. But when the time came when they had to wage war on land to defend Venice, where they ought to have sent their own citizens to fight in land, they enlisted as their captain a foreigner, Marquis de Monta. This was the sinister course which prevented them from rising to the skies and expanding. And they did this in the belief that as they knew how to wage war at sea, they should not trust themselves in waging it on land, which was the unwise belief, because a sea captain who was accustomed to combat with winds, water, and men could more easily become a captain on land, where the combat is with men only, and a land captain became a sea one, then a land captain become a sea one. And my Romans, knowing how to combat on land and not on sea, when a war broke out with the Carthaginians, who were powerful on the sea, did not enlist Greeks or Spaniards experienced at sea, but imposed that change on those citizens they sent to fight on land, and they won. If they did this in order that one of their citizens should not become a tyrant, it was fear that was given little consideration. For in addition to the other reasons mentioned a short while ago concerning such a proposal, if a citizen skilled in the use of arms at sea had never been made a tyrant in a city situated in the sea, so much less would have been able to do this if he were skilled in the use of arms on land. And because of this, they ought to have seen that the arms in the hands of their own citizens could not create tyrants, but the evil institutions of a government are those which cause a city to be tyrannized. 1520. This is 1520. This is 1520. I just want to put that there. This is like, yo.
And it happened again.
1520. And because of this, they ought to be seen the arms in the hands of their own citizens could not create tyrants, but the evil institutions of a government are those which cause a city to be tyrannized. Jesus fucking Christ. And that they had a good government did not have to fear arms of their own citizens. They took an imprudent course, therefore, which was the cause of their being deprived of much glory and happiness, as of the error which a king of France makes in not having his people disciplined to war. From what has been cited from the examples previously mentioned, there is no one devoid of some particular passion of theirs who does not judge this defect of being a republic, and that this negligence alone is what makes it weak. But I've made too great a digression and have gotten away from my subject. Yet I have done this to answer you and to show you that no reliance can be had on arms other than one's own, and one's own arms cannot be established otherwise than by the way of ordinance, nor can forms of army be introduced in any place, nor military discipline instituted. If you have read the arrangements which first kings made in Rome, and especially of Servius Tullus, you will find that the institution of classes is none other than the arrangement to be able to quickly put together an army for the defense of that city. But turning to our Delato, I say that again, having to replenish and establish old organization, I would take the 17-year-olds, but having to create a new one, I would take them of every age between 17 and 40 in order to avail myself of them quickly.
Would you make a difference of what profession, art you would choose them from?
Fabrizio, these writers do so, for they do not want that bird hunters, fishermen, cooks, procurers, anyone who makes amusement his calling should be taken, but they want that in addition to the tillers of the soil, smiths, blacksmiths, carpenters, butchers, hunters, and such like should be taken. But I would make little difference in conjecturing from his calling and how good the man may be, but how much I can use him with the greatest usefulness. And for this reason, the peasants who are accustomed to working the land are more useful than anyone else. For of all the professions, arts, this one used more than any other in the army. After this, the forgers, smiths, carpenters, blacksmiths, shoemakers, of whom it is useful to have many, for their skills succeed in many things. But as they were very good they were a very good thing for a soldier to have. From who do you draw double service?
For those who are or are not suitable to fight chosen.
I want to talk of the manner of selecting a new organization in order to make it afterwards into an army, which yet also apply in the discussion of selection should be made in remaining an old established organization. I say therefore that how good the man is that you should have to select as a soldier is recognized either from his experience, shown by some excellent deeds of his, or by conjecture. The proof of virtue cannot be found in men who are newly selected, and who never have before been selected, and in the former few or none are found in an organization which is newly established. It is necessary, therefore, lacking experience, to have recourse to conjecture, which is derived from their age, profession, and physical appearance. The first two have been discussed, but it remains to talk about the third. And yet I say that some have wanted the soldier to be big, among whom was some of others have chosen them only from the strength of the body, as Caesar did, which strength of the body is conjectured from the composition of the members and the gracefulness of aspect. And yet some of those who write say that he should have lively and merry eyes, a nervy neck, large breasts, muscular arms, long fingers, a small stomach, round hips, sleek legs and feet, which parts usually render a man strong and agile, which are two things sought above everything else in a soldier. He ought above all to have regard for his habits, and there should be in him a sense of honesty and shame. Otherwise, there will be selected only an instrument of trouble and beginning of corruption, for there is no one who believes that in the dishonest education and brutish mind there can exist some virtue, which some part may be praiseworthy, nor does it appear to me superfluous. Rather, I believe it necessary in order for you to understand better the importance of this election. I tell you the method that Roman consuls at the start of their magistracy observed in selecting the Roman legions, in which the lotto, because those who had been selected were a mixture of new and veteran men. Because of the continuing wars, they proceeded from experience with regard to the old veteran men and from the conjecture with regard for the new. And this ought to be noted that the are made either for immediate training and use for future employment. I have talked and will talk of those that are made for future employment because my intention is now to show how an army can be organized in countries where there is no military organization, in which countries I cannot have the levy in order to make use of them, but in countries where there is a custom to call out armies, and by means of the prince these deleti exist, as was observed in Rome and today observed among the Swiss. For in these delities, if there are for the selection of new men, there are so many others accustomed to being under military orders that with the old veteran and new being mixed together make a good and united body. Notwithstanding this, the emperors, when they began to hold fixed the term of service of the soldiers, placed new men in charge over the soldiers, whom they called Teroni, as teachers to train them. And as is seen with the life of the Emperor Maximus, which thing, while Rome was free, was instituted, not in the army, but within the city. And as the military exercises where young men were trained were in the city, there resulted that those then chosen to go to war, being accustomed in the method of mock warfare, could easily adapt themselves to real war. But afterwards, when these emperors discontinued these exercises, it was necessary to employ the methods I had described to you. Arriving, therefore, at the methods of the Roman selection, I say that as soon as the Roman consuls, on whom imposed the carrying of the war, had assumed magistracy, and wanting to organize their army, as if it was a custom that each of them had 2 legions of the Roman men who were the nerve center of their armies, created 24 military tribunes, 6 for each legion, who filled out that office, which today is done by those whom we call constables. After they had assembled all the Roman men adept at carrying arms and placed the tribunes on each legion apart from each of the others, afterwards, by lot they drew the tribes, from which the first selection was made, and of that tribe they selected 4 of the best men, whom one was selected by the tribunes of the first legion, and that the other 3 were selected by the tribunes of the second legion. Of the other 2, one was selected by the tribunes of the third, and the last belonged to the fourth legion. After these 4 others were selected, of whom the first man was selected by the tribunes of the second legion, the second by those of the third, and the third by those of the fourth. The fourth remained to the first. After another 4 were chosen, the first man was selected by the tribunes of the third legion, right? So they went into like a snake joint. And thus the method of selection changed successively, right? It's kind of how fantasy football works. So that the selection came to be equal and the legions equalized. And as we said above, this was done where the men were to be used immediately. It was formed of men from whom a good part were experienced in real warfare and everyone in mock battles. This dilato was able to be based on conjecture and experience, but when a new army has to be organized and the selection made for future employment, this dilato cannot be based on except on conjecture, which is done by age and physical appearance.
I believe what you have said is entirely true, but before you pass on to other discussion, I want to ask about one thing which you have made me remember. When you said that the dilato, which should be made where these men are not accustomed to fighting, should be done by conjecture. For I have heard our organization censored in many of its parts, and especially as to number. For many say that a lesser number ought to be taken, for whom those that are drawn would be better, and the selection better, as there would not be as much hardship imposed on the men, and some rewards given them, by means of which they would be more content and would be better commanded. Whence I would like to know your opinion on this part, and if you preferred a greater rather than a smaller number, and what methods you would use in selecting both numbers.
Without a doubt, the greater number is more desirable and more necessary than the smaller. Rather to say, better, where a great number are not available, a perfect organization cannot be made, and I will easily refute all the reasons cited in favor of this. I say, therefore, first, that where there are many people as there are many in Tuscany does not cause you to have better ones, or that the lotto is more selective for desiring the selection of men to judge them on the basis of experience. Only a few would probably be found in that country who have had its experience, as much because of a few have been at war, because few have been in war, as because of those few who have been. Very few have ever been put to the test, so that because of this, they might merit to be chosen before the others, so that whoever is in a similar situation should select them must leave experience to one side and take them by conjecture. And if I were brought to such a necessity, I would want to see if 20 young men of good physical appearance should come before me. With what I rule, I ought to take some or reject some, so that without doubt I believe that every man will confess that it is much smaller error to take them all in arming and training them, being unable to know beforehand which of them are better, and to reserve oneself afterwards to make more certain the lotto, where during the exercises within the army those of greater courage and vitality may be observed, so that considering everything, the selection of this case of in a few in order to have them better, it is entirely false, as to causing the hardship of a country. And to have the men, I say that the ordinance, whether it is bad or insufficient, does not cause any hardship. For this order does not take men away from their business, and does not bind them, so they cannot go carry out their business, because it only obliges them to come together for training on their free days, which proposition does not do any harm, either to a country or to the men. Rather to the young, it ought to be delightful, for where on holidays they remain basely indolent in their hangouts, they would now attend these exercises with pleasure, for the drawing of arms, as it is a beautiful spectacle, is thus delightful to the young men, as to being able to pay more to the lesser number, and thereby keeping them more content and obedient. I reply that no organization can be of so few made who are paid so continuously that their pay satisfies them. For instance, if an army of 5,000 infantry could be organized, and wanting to pay them so that it should be believed that they could be contented, they must be given at least 10,000 ducats a month. To begin with, a number of infantry is not enough to make an army, and the payment is unendurable to a state. And on the other hand, it is not sufficient to keep men content and obligated to respect your position, so that in doing this, although much would be spent, it would provide little strength and would not be sufficient to defend you or enable you to undertake any enterprise. If you should give them more or take on more, so much more impossible would it be for you to pay them. If you should give them less and take on fewer, so much less will be content, and so much less would they be to you. Therefore, those who consider these things which are either useless or impossible, it is indeed necessary to pay them when they are levied to send to war. But even in such an arrangement should give hardship to those enrolled in it in times of peace, which I do not see. They are all recompensed by those benefits which an army established in a city bring for without them. Nothing is secure. I conclude that whoever desires a small number in order to be able to pay them, or for any other reason cited by you, does not know what he is doing. For it will also happen, in my opinion, that any number will always diminish in your hands, because the infinite impediments that men have, so that the small number will succeed in nothing. However, when you have a large organization, you can at your election avail yourself of few or many. And in addition to this, it serves you, in fact, and a reputation, for the large number will always give you reputation. Moreover, in creating the organization in order to keep men trained, if you enroll a small number of men in many countries, and the armies are very distant from each other, you cannot, without the gravest injury to them, assemble them for joint exercises, and without training the organization, it is useless and will be shown as its proper place.
What you have said is enough on my question, but I now desire that you resolve another doubt for me. There are those who say that as such multitude of our men would cause confusion, trouble, and disorder in the country.
This is another vain opinion for the reason I will tell you. These organized under arms can cause disorders in two ways, either among themselves or among others. Both of these can be obviated where discipline by itself should not do so. For as troubles among themselves, the organization removes them, not brings them up. Because in the organization, if you give them arms and leaders, if the country where you organize them is so unwarlike that there is not arms amongst its men, and so united that there are no leaders, such an organization will make them more ferocious against the foreigner. But in no way will it make it more disunited, because men well organized, well armed, whether armed or unarmed, fear the laws and can never change. Unless the leaders give them cause a change. And I will later tell you that in the manner of doing this, but if the country where you have organized an army is warlike and disunited, this organization alone is reason enough to unite them. For these men have arms and leaders, and for themselves, but the arms are useless for war, and the leaders causes of troubles. But this organization gives them arms useful for war, and the leaders who will extinguish troubles. For as soon as someone's injured in that country, he has recourse to his leader of the party, who, to maintain his reputation, advises him to avenge himself and not remain in peace. The public leader does to the contrary, so that by this means and causes for trouble are removed, replaced by those for union. And provinces which are united but effeminate, unwarlike, lose their usefulness but maintain the union, while those who are disunited and troublesome remain united, that disordinate ferocity which they usually employ is turned to public usefulness. As to desiring that they do us injury against others, it should be kept in mind that they cannot do this except by the leaders who govern them. In desiring that the leaders do not cause disorders, it is necessary to have care that they do not acquire too much authority over them, and you have to keep in mind that this authority is acquired either naturally or by accident. And as to nature, it must be provided that whoever is born in one place is put in charge of men enrolled in another place, but is made a leader in those places where he does not have any natural connections. As to accidents, you ever notice how like all the leaders of men in like the troops in like Fort Dix and shit came from California? Sophocles, you ever notice that, man?
Notice what? Say the whole sentence again. The leaders and what?
All right. So, in desire the leaders and not cause disorders, it is necessary to have care that they do not acquire too much authority over them. And you have to keep in mind that this authority is acquired either naturally or by accident. And as nature, it must be provided that whoever is born in one place is not put in charge of men enrolled in another place, but is made leader in those places where he does not have any natural connections.
Oh, they put a guy in charge somewhere else than his like hometown or wherever he's from or something.
Yep. You ever notice how the military does that now?
I haven't really paid attention to that. thinking back on it, like they had this one dude. He was like, I would have said he was top shelf. He was like really. He probably was like a high end officer, and they put him in Fort Riley. And he had like, he was one of those guys. He was like 4 generations of like high end officers, and like, I don't know, they were all Rangers or whatever. And then they stick this dude in the middle of Fort Riley, Kansas. And then the sergeant major, he was a Creole guy, which also seems cruel. They put this dude who's been exposed to good food in the middle of Kansas. And I don't know why they put these guys here, but that's probably a good reason why.
That's why. Like that's why they do that, right? You know what I mean? Understand something like, like all the things, you know what I'm saying, that we're reading right now and we're talking about, it's just things that like they apply today. Right.
Yeah. It also seems like when they stop doing some of this stuff, like things start to fall apart, and it kind of feels like some of those things are happening too.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it just, again, 1520. You know what I'm saying? And literally being applied in 2020. 500 years later.
To the T.
Right? Ain't that fucking crazy? You know what I mean? It's bananas. Anyway, so as the accidents, the organization should be such that each year the leaders are exchanged from command, for continuous authority over the same men generates so much unity among them, which can easily be converted into prejudice against the prince. As the change is being used to those who have employed them and injurious to those who have not observed them, it is known that the example of the kingdom of Assyria and the empire of the Romans, in which it is seen that the former kingdom endured 1,000 years without tumult and without civil war, which did not result from anything else other than the exchange of those captains who were placed in charge of the care of the armies from place to place every year. Nor for other reasons did it result in the Roman Empire once the blood race of Caesar was extinguished. So many civil wars arose among the captains of the armies, and so many conspiracies of the above mentioned, captains against the emperors, resulting from the continuing of those captains in their same commands. And if any of those emperors and any who later held the empire by reputation, such as Hadrian, Marcus, Severus, and others like them, who would observe such happenings and would have introduced this custom of exchanging captains in that empire, without doubt they would have made it more tranquil and lasting. For the captains would have had fewer opportunities for creating tumults, and the emperors fewer causes to fear them. And the Senate, when there was a lack of succession, would have had more authority in the election of emperors, and consequently better conditions would have resulted. But the bad customs of men, whether from ignorance or little diligence, or from the examples of good or bad, are never put aside.
I do not know if, with my question, I have gone outside the limits you set, for from the Delato, we have entered into another discussion, and if I should not be excused a little, I shall believe I merit some reproach.
This did us no harm, from all the discussion was necessary in wanting to discuss the organization of an army, which being censored by many, it was necessary to explain it. If it is desired that this should take place before the Delato and before I discuss the other parts, I want to discuss the Delato for men on horseback. This selection was done by the ancients from among more wealthy, having regard for the age and quality of men, selecting 300 for each legion, so that the Roman cavalry in every consular army did not exceed 600.
Did you organize the cavalry in order to train them at home and avail yourself of them in the future?
Actually, it is a necessity and cannot be done otherwise. If you want to have them take up arms for you and do not want to take them away from those who make a profession of them.
How would you select them?
I would imitate the Romans. I would take the more wealthy and give them leaders in the same manner as they are given to others today, and I would arm them and train them.
Would it be well to give these men some provision?
Yes, indeed, but only as much as is necessary to take care of the horse. For as it brings an expense to your subjects, they could complain of you, and it would be necessary, therefore, to pay them for the horse and its upkeep.
How many would you make? How would you arm them?
If you pass into another discussion, I will tell you its place, which will be when I have said how the infantry ought to be armed and how they should prepare for an engagement. And that's the end of the chapter. God damn.
Yay. We did it.
We did it.
You did most of it.
Yo, man, listen, I'm saying, like, I've already done, believe it or not, I've already fucking done this once, I'm saying, but I didn't actually stand here and, have, like, fucking somebody else reading the Cosmo parts, which is, like, something I kind of really wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No, I get that. That's really smart.
like I was like, dude, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that should be broken down this way. And then I want to break down the discourses as well, which I think are important too. But you notice, like, yo, how, like, legitimately, like, most of, like, the shit that we think about in our government today is kind of already in this motherfucker.
Yeah. There was some stuff that was like I thought was messed up with the army. Like when they explained it, I'm like, oh, okay, so it kind of makes sense that they do it that way, you know?
Yeah. You know what I mean? It's most definitely a super interesting fucking thing. And it's something that, you know, we don't conversate about enough about, like, how
No.
this is a republic. And if you wanted to look for a republic before this one, you'd be searching for a while until you got back to the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because like we can't really like pick the French, right? Because they got like the Foreign Legion, and then they start a new republic. Like it seems like once every like 20 years or something like that.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And not only that, they really, you know what I'm saying, they didn't really have a republic. They had emperors and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I figured, you know what I mean, like I figured you might enjoy this, you know what I'm saying? But there's actually like 12 more books if you're interested, or 12 more chapters on this. You know what I mean? If you're interested some other time, you know what I mean, we can do some more of this, right? Like, this is, you know what I mean, awesome. Maybe we can switch parts, you know what I mean, go back and forth, whatever. You know what I mean? So I don't have to read the whole goddamn thing again, but like, yeah. But anyway, I'm going to do my outro, you know what I mean? And then, like, yo, if y'all want to come up and ask any questions and shit, you can, you know what I mean? So, like, yo, look, Tom Pease with Pnoid News, you know how it works. You know what I mean? Like, I want to thank Neuro over in the Rhetoric server for letting me do this. I'll make sure the link is in the description. Thank you, Sophocles, for helping me out. But man, listen, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy yourselves. Da da da. You know how the fuck it is. Peace.